friends. Hey, Mike Falkenstein here with 1-8 Catalyst. Thank you so much for joining us for what is now the second episode in a series we're doing of Mission Talk on Western Missionaries versus sort of training and equipping nationals. And so, Steve, I know that, we're getting into summer. Before we get into our topic, I know you've kind of got some vacation coming up, don't you? It's kind of vacation season.
Yeah, so whenever this airs, I will be post-vacation.
Oh,
But
okay.
yeah, we haven't really taken a decent vacation other than maybe going nearby, a
All
couple
right.
hours away. So this is the first vacation we've taken in a while. Puerto Rico, where my wife is from. But
Oh, great.
it's also part family visit. We'll be seeing family I've never
Okay.
met before. So it's
Oh,
been
great.
years since she's been there. I've never been there. Her parents, who are with us now, are going to be going back with us and seeing their siblings.
Okay.
So yeah, it's going to be a good trip. Of course, we're going to have a lot of fun. We're so ready to go. I think
That's
mentally,
great.
I'm already there.
That's great. We'll come back just for a little bit while we do this
Maybe
episode,
I don't
and then we'll
know.
let you go.
I get there and say, "Hey, we're moving."
That's right. Well, hopefully you'll come back and be tan, rested, and ready for
I
what God
don't
has next
tan.
for
I
you.
go from pink to red. So
Oh, really? Okay. That's funny. Well, good. Well, it's always a fun season to be able to, get away and kind of unplug for a little bit. So I hope that goes well for you. And yeah, we are sort of in the second episode, as I mentioned, in this series that we're doing. And so for those of you that are watching, if you've just happened to catch this and you go, wait, I never saw the first episode, simply go to facebook.com/missions talk and catch that first episode and watch that one first.
mm-hmm.
And then you'll be sort of caught up and ready for us to talk about sort of the pros and cons. But Steve, if we were to give a quick overview of episode 1, we just tried to kind of lay the foundation and the groundwork for, okay, biblically, what are we talking about? Of course, we really do want, those that are unreached to be reached. We have some biblical mandates that Jesus gives to us to go and proclaim the gospel to the whole creation and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them and teaching them. And that largely is done particularly for places that don't have the gospel, for, sending people who do have the gospel to send it and bring it to other places, right? So as we talk about then, Steve, this episode 2, obviously you and I mentioned that there's a lot to be said about this. And I just thought it'd be interesting to kind of go through kind of a pros and cons of sending Western missionaries versus training nationals. And so if you were to start on, I know we talked about the finances part in episode 1. Is there any other piece of the financial piece of this debate that you felt like we didn't talk about?
We covered quite a bit. I do want to
Mm-hmm.
say I'm very much pro. I'm pro missionary. I'm pro foreign
right.
missionary. I'm pro national missionary, national pastors. I do believe it's right and good for a Westerner to support a national. I think it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
I do believe it still has to be done with caution. Largely in the same way we would not just rush to support an American missionary. We would want to know that they're ready, that they're called, that their church is behind it. And, missionaries are largely supported outside of a few, denominational entities. They're largely supported
Mm-hmm.
by the gifts of people they know personally. So there's relationship between the one sending the missionary and the missionary, him or herself.
Right.
So in the same line, just throwing money at someone far away because a better return on investment is cheaper to support them than an American, without knowing them, without having some idea of who they are as a person, having that relationship, the trust, then it's good to support them, but we need that. But at the same time, maybe I still think it's okay to support someone maybe you don't know, but you need to support.
Right.
You need to trust at least the sending mechanism that they've been sent through. So whether it's an organization that you trust, you want to know that there's accountability and transparency. And,
That's right.
And there's a process. It's just not, hey, they're cheaper than us, so let's just give them money. They're a national. That's, if you watch the first one, we're not for that. We're for doing it well and right and smart.
That's right.
Wisely.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And so, Steve, just in what you've said, that gives us a good launching point, because if this debate is, okay, we've got Western missionaries that probably are going to cost more than to a country versus a national who's already there. There are pros and cons to which side is better, right? And so we did talk quite a bit about the cost difference in episode 1. The one that we didn't talk about, Steve, that I think might be helpful is sort of what you kind of insinuated about, which is there's really two topics here. One is the training that potential missionary has received, both Western and national, and secondly, willingness to go, right? Because we'll talk about that in a minute. But I know that you gave in our show notes a couple of examples, and I know of a couple of examples of, the one I always talk about is, with 1-8 Catalyst, as we were trying to decide exactly what God was doing in our ministry as we were transitioning from doing ministry exclusively in China to something else. We began to learn about unreached people groups in China, and largely the majority people group in China, the Han Chinese, look at those minority people group in less than good light. Maybe you could say most of them, even Christians, are largely unwilling to go to unreached people groups within their own country. And so you say, well, they'd be the ones to send. They're already Chinese. They know Chinese. But if they're not trained to minister to unreached people groups and they're unwilling to go, it doesn't do you much good. I mean, it doesn't matter about the return on investment, right? So talk first, Steve, about kind of the training, because generally Western missionaries are going to be pretty well trained. I mean, we've got a system, organizations that have a lot of, we're going to have theological training. Most of our people will know the Bible quite well. We'll have received training on sort of missionary care and how to care for ourselves. And, you and I both have this experience in China where during Chinese New Year, they generally get away to Thailand and take some time for themselves, and they're caring for their families. And, there are times when a national may not have that kind of support and training level, right? So kind of talk us through kind of the training side of kind of the pros and cons there.
Oh boy, give me an easy question. All right, so what I'm not, let's just say what I'm not addressing here is a national who is reaching people, his own people, in his own community. I'm not addressing that.
Yeah, that's a whole separate issue.
That's a separate group of people, group of national missionaries. Because in America, when we say national, we love everything to be black and white. Okay, we don't like nuances. And so when we look at India and we say, we're going to support this Indian to work in India because he's a national and he knows better. Well, what do you mean by that? Is it going from an Urdu speaker to a Hindi speaker? What about a Bengali speaker? What about a Muslim, a Hindu, a Baha'i? So which group of people? Are we going from Southern culture to Northern culture? I mean, there's so many nuances just in India alone. You can't say I'm going to support a national in India because they can reach their country for Christ. They can't, because they're going to have to learn lots of languages. They're going to have to learn lots of cultures. Right. And they're not necessarily equipped for that. They're equipped for their people their community, where they came from. They know how to reach them, yes. But
Yeah.
even within like places like Delhi, Mumbai, Hyderabad, you can literally walk across the street and be in a different people group with a different religion and a different language, just walking across the street.
Mm.
It's not, I've seen it personally. And so even in Delhi, there's going to be differences in
All
culture.
right.
So when we're looking at these and we're thinking of a Hindi speaking from a Hindu background in Delhi going to an Urdu speaker, which is similar to Hindi. I mean, there's similarities between the two languages, but a Muslim
Mm.
background, and then you go from a high caste to a low caste. You've got so many barriers there that you have to cross. The person going, it's not to say they shouldn't be sent and the nationals shouldn't be supported to do that kind of crossing, but they need to be trained. They need to find a way. But the problem is, and I've discussed this with many people in other countries, there's not a great deal of training resources for people outside the West,
Mm.
okay, or outside of developed countries like Europe, North America, Australia, Singapore, South Korea, places like that. There's not a lot of great cross-cultural training. I mean, there's a cross-cultural training program we use is an hour from my house that we send our American, but I can't send someone from South America there if they can't come to America. I can't send an
Right.
Indian national there because of the cost of bringing them here. And the
Right.
difficulty of just getting them here. And so there's a lot of nuances, a lot of barriers we've got to figure out. I mentioned Reuben in our first episode, and most of their their first group of missionaries in training speak English. So there is a program in the U.S. outside of Atlanta that if you speak English, you can actually get virtual cross-cultural training, which is going to be good enough, I would
Oh,
say.
right.
But you have to speak English. You have to understand English. You got to be able to do the homework in English. If you can't do that, then
Right. That's unique. Good.
yeah, you're out of luck, really. And so there are issues with training. There's struggles with getting training. It's not that the
Okay.
training doesn't exist in the world. The question is, does it exist in the language and the culture that it's needed in for those missionaries to be trained?
All right. That's a good point, by the way. That's really a good point. Because you're right. Yeah.
And just a quick example, one of our guys lives in one country. I'll say country A is his. Country B nearby him, which I can't identify, those pastors reached out to our guy and said, can you teach us how to go cross-cultural, how to cross cultural barriers to reach different people groups within our country? Because the pastors in country B knew that to just simply go to them was not going to be sufficient. Sure, they knew how to evangelize, they knew how to disciple their own people, but to do it cross-culturally, they had no idea. So they reached, and so our guy's been training them for the past year off and on through Zoom, how to go to them. And they've been going out there slowly doing it, going to those other unreached people groups to be able to deliver the gospel to them. But they knew they needed help to know how to do it first.
Oh, right. That's right. That's really a good point. And Steve, as you talk, it reminded me of when we were doing ministry exclusively in China. We were doing some training, some theological training in rural China, and we had several times where the leaders of the little Bible training school would ask us, we'd love to send someone to another part of China, but we've never done that before. And, how do you set up a missions department? How do you support a missionary, someone to go to another place? How do you make sure, they just don't have that training? And you think about just in the United States, the depth we have in that area. I mean, there are whole organizations that just do that, right? That provide that kind of, those kind of resources and training, or larger organizations that have a whole department and that's all they do. right? It's just missionary care. And so,
Mm-hmm.
so yes, that's a good point that, um, that we might get blinded thinking nationals are better, but boy, let's look into their exact situation and who they want to minister to, that they feel called to, what support system do they have?
It's not always black
And
and white.
yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. That's a good one. And then the second one I mentioned, Steve, is the willingness for a national to go to another place in their own country, right? So I mentioned this idea of Han Chinese going to Southwest China and ministering to the unreached people groups in that area. And there's kind of a two-way issue there potentially. One, they're largely unwilling to go. I mean, it would take a very clear call of God for them to go. And then secondly, like you mentioned in the first episode about the Han Chinese going to minister to the Uyghurs, how are they going to be received? Because in both
Mm-hmm.
cases, whether it's the Uyghurs or, a lot of these unreached, ethnic people groups in Southwest China do not think very favorably of Han Chinese. And so that actually might be a barrier to the gospel, where, someone from their country even might have a more easy path. And so those are a couple of things to consider as well when we talk about supporting nationals, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And as you was talking, I was thinking about where I lived in China, there was a significant Hui Muslim population. And so we did some effort of trying to get some local believers. I mean, obviously, I didn't know every church in the city. There was many I didn't know. But the ones I was interacting with, we tried to cast the vision to bringing the gospel to that Hui community. We tried. There were a few that I knew that got involved, not necessarily because of me, but I do know a few that got involved. But I know many who just refused. And this was in the same city. In fact, when I remember taking them down one time just to expose the place to them. And we're not talking going hours away. It took, 10, 15 minutes by taxi to get there from where these people were living.
Okay.
But some of them were born and raised there in their 20s and 30s, and they would tell me this was the first time they ever been down there. I was like,
oh, wow.
And I was a little shocked because this was a huge tourist area. I mean, people would come there for the food. The food was amazing. But just meeting a number of believers who just weren't interested in going down there. And when you talk about the need of the gospel going into that community, they weren't interested.
Wow.
And they spoke the same language. There were probably some religious, from a religious standpoint, there were words that maybe they would have to do differently, use differently, or say differently. But overall, they could communicate with no problem. There were definitely somewhat different cultures, but similar enough where they wouldn't have to learn as much as you and I would have to learn to cross those barriers. The barriers they have to cross are a lot fewer. But again, it was difficult to get any of them to find one that was truly interested. Again, I think I could count two who went down there personally, and I'm sure there were others. I did come across others later that we helped train through other people that got involved. But for years and years, it just seemed really difficult to get the church in the city to engage the whole city, not just their own people, but the whole city. And that included the Muslims.
Wow. Isn't that something? Yeah, because you think about, man, they're 10 or 15 minutes away. That's a pretty strategic opportunity. You don't have to get on a plane. You don't have to even go on a train. You're right there.
Absolutely.
So yeah, a lot potentially to be said about that. But so Steve, as we look at the last, 10, 15 minutes of this episode, maybe we could kind of go through sort of a overview for the mission pastors that are watching, the mission sending agency, leaders, and those that have a real interest in kind of this topic. So let's just kind of talk about, okay, so for Western missionaries, as we mentioned in episode 1, we don't want to assume that we know what God, he can do whatever he wants, however he wants. What are the things as it relates to, sending Western missionaries? Now, you mentioned, make sure you know a lot about their calling. Ask them directly about their calling. Obviously, they've got their budget to set up. They've got, if they're a married family, they're going to have kids, and so there's concerns there. As these leaders that are watching are praying about how best to send Western missionaries, what are your best thoughts about that?
Well, I mean, in terms of the Western missionaries, I think we can't just give up on them because it might cost more and require more financially. Mm-hmm. I think, as we've talked about, we have a number of great training programs here in the U.S. Some organizations have their own training, but
that's
there's third-party training programs. I know there's one in North Carolina. There's one in Colorado. There's one outside of Atlanta. And they train anyone from any organization, and they do a good job.
Oh,
and
that's great.
It's great. They've got, I know the one in North Carolina, their staff has a ton of experience on the mission field. They know what they're looking for. They know how to train. They've done very well. So, on one end, obviously in most cases, we're supporting people we know and have some connection to.
That's right.
I mean, it's not necessarily that everyone is supporting someone they know very well. I've gone to bat for one of our missionaries that is moving abroad, and a friend of mine trusts me. They know me, so they supported them because I asked them to. And
all right,
I think there's I guess better than using the word relationship. It's, I guess, relationship or trust with someone or something. You either trust the organization, or you trust the missionary themselves, or you trust a friend who knows the missionary.
Right.
And so that can be true for the Westerner. It could be true for the national. And that they've been vetted, not just on their own. I mean, I've come across many people. I'm going to be a missionary. I don't want to do the mission organization thing because I don't like accountability. I mean, they don't say it like that, but that's basically what's happening.
Right.
Those are probably not the ones people really want to get behind, because if there's no accountability, if there's no infrastructure, if there's nothing there to help them along the way, to care for them, it's maybe they'll survive, maybe they'll make it, but by and large, most of them don't.
Yeah, they probably won't. Yeah, I would just second that. I mean, say what you want about sending organizations and some of their things they make people go through. It's a net benefit for sure, right? I mean, you want leadership above them that are, holding them accountable, as you mentioned, but then also, again, I mentioned the missionary care piece. There's just too much stress and pressure and changes that are going through for a missionary, particularly a couple that has kids, that, you do not want to Lone Ranger that thing. I don't think, that's not a good deal. So,
absolutely.
I would just second that. And then in terms of nationals, we've mentioned quite a bit already, but obviously it's, find out about their training, their equipping, where they want to go. Are they going to have to do language study, which a lot of times, they're probably going to, depending on. And so again, and then you would follow up that with, what is your willingness to do that language study? Just because you're Chinese and you're going to one of these unreached people groups, well, they have a different language, potentially. And you might it may take you 2 or 3 years to learn it. And, what do you think about that? So So yeah, the sending the nationals is not always the route, right? So as you think about, giving advice about that, is there any other pieces to have people be looking out for?
Well, as you know, I'm very pro sending and supporting nationals. For us at Silk Road Catalyst, when people ask me about our national staff, one of the first things I tell them, we treat them the same way we treat our Americans.
Mm,
They're held to the same accountability standard, the same financial standard. We don't give them leeway just because they come from a different country or they come from a different economic background.
right. Right. Same
If,
standards, right? Yeah.
if it comes down to reimbursements and receipting and anything, same policies apply to them as they apply to myself.
That's great.
And so, I would, just like an American, I would say you've either got to you got to know the person and trust them. You got to know that they have accountability, not just ministry, but financially, and how they're using funds, how they're accounted for. That's critical. Or
That's
you
right.
gotta trust the person. I go to bat for some of our missionaries, especially our nationals, but I'm asking people to trust me. I'm asking people to trust them, but in trusting them, trust me first. We've done
Right.
the vetting. We're not just giving money away to people that, just because they're a Christian in some faraway place and they need it. We're not doing that. I've said no so many times to people, wanting to join an organization, wanting
That's right.
money
You
from an
have.
organization that had nothing to do with us. We don't just give money to people. They have
Right.
to be connected to us, and there has to be a reason for those funds. And even from a salary point of view with our nationals, our board sets what that is. You
Right.
know, we just don't, hey, here's a lump sum of money, all the money that came in, here it is. No, we have rules of how that's dispersed. Now it's set aside for them, it's reserved for them, but to get access to it, we have our policies in place. So I think, however, I would say it's the same way as looking at Westerners. And the way that you want to support a Westerner, apply the same to a national.
That's good advice.
Don't treat them differently. Apply the same rules. And if you're not applying any rules, then, take our advice. Ask them, how are you accountable? What organization are you a part of? If you don't know their church, if you don't know their organization, and they're just contacting you through Facebook because they think you've got the money to support them, don't get pressured into giving money.
That's right. That's right. That's right. That's very good, Steve. And so, yeah, that, you and I have talked about how sometimes I appreciate what you said about saying no, because you and I have talked about, sometimes the nationals look at us as Westerners as kind of the money machine, so to speak, right? And it's like, no, it doesn't work that way.
So, some
We
of
need to
them,
know,
we've both come
you know,
across some that
yeah,
definitely do that, and then there's some who
yeah,
don't. Who,
right. Yeah, you don't want to lump them all in, of course, in that category. But for those that you do find, yeah, you know all the stuff that you just mentioned, their ministry, their organization, their church, who's over what they're doing, who's watching what they're doing,
and take your time.
yes,
Don't rush into it. Do your due
that's right.
diligence in researching who they are. Even if you feel, okay, God wants me to support them, do your due diligence first and let it test out if they're
That's awesome.
really the person God's brought to you to support.
That's great. Well, Steve, since you've had experience in this area, probably more than I have, if there was a way for, if there is anyone watching who wants to sort of connect with you more about this, what would be the best way for them to do that? Would that be email or Facebook message, the Mission Stock page, or what would be best?
Yeah, so, multiple ways. So our website, silkroadcatalyst.com.
Well, I would just encourage all of you, to just get in touch with Steve if you have other questions, because again, the nature of his ministry is much more, missionary sending, and my thoughts on this are much more. So if you want more practical application, he's your guy. If you want the theoretical stuff, you obviously can get in touch with us and with me on 18catalyst.org. But, Steve, thanks for that. I hope that people take advantage of that. So Steve, as we end this episode, we've talked about a lot. Of course, you and I eventually will have to determine if there's more content to have more episodes, which I would just say at this point there may be, right? We could sort of talk about this, and then we could even have, guests come in and talk about this from, their perspective. But if you were to give some final words for this episode, and just some conclusions, what would they be?
Well, I think we should have more episodes.
Okay.
Some that are maybe more narrow in their focus. I know we painted a lot of things with a very broad brush today.
Yes, we did.
And in especially the last episode. So, just we know that we can't deal with every little detail, every nuance that's out there.
That's right.
We were trying to address this from the point of view from a Western point of view of why this is happening, why it seems to be pitting a Western missionary, sending a Westerner versus supporting and training a national. There seems to be this tension at times here in America where we're causing these two groups of people to compete when we really shouldn't have them compete.
Yeah, that's right.
They're both needed.
This isn't a competition.
They're both needed in the grand scheme of things, and it's just a matter of doing it well, whether sending a foreigner well or supporting a national well. It's not either or; it's both and. So, I know we tried to deal with that as best as we could. I'm sure it fell short in some areas, but we definitely, I think, as you were posing that train of thought, a thought came to mind about a more narrow subject matter within this bigger picture that I'll discuss with you later. But I think it's definitely, there's lots of things to talk about with this.
Yeah, let's do it. I look forward to that. So, my final thoughts, of course, are just hopefully for those that are making these decisions, who should we support? At what level? I would just say that it's not a black and white issue, as we've mentioned. I would say in either case, do we send the Western missionary, particularly if you have that person already identified and who feels called, and comparing them to just taking that money and supporting maybe even several nationals. Get into the weeds a little bit and take time. There's no standard answers here, right? There's just no way that you can do this in a very simple way. Ask the questions on both sides, figure out how God is leading, and to have a blanket statement that we only support nationals or we only support people from our own church or our own city is in my view not the best, only because, again, God can do whatever he wants to do. And so in the discernment and in prayer about all of this, he's going to show you exactly, what's best for what he wants to do in a particular place and in a particular time. So, good, Steve. Well, let's, we'll begin sort of brainstorming about some additional issues. If, viewer, you have some issues in this way that in these topics that you'd like us to talk about, or if you'd even like to chime in and send us a paragraph or two about your thoughts, we'd love to hear from you. So you can go to facebook.com/missions talk and direct message us there. We would so love to hear from you and get your thoughts. Of course, it's a big topic, so this is definitely the more voices in some ways the merrier. Only in that it's maybe we'd be able to pull nuggets of truth out of all of this and come up with some even better solutions. So thank you for watching. Sure appreciate you all. If you like these episodes, be sure to share it on your social media platforms. We'd love to just get the content to more people. And we're so thankful for your viewership and your participation, and we will look forward to having you with us on the next episode of Missions Talk.